COIN, Community-Oriented Integration Network, is a network of friends, people of experience, who explore how to develop local communities for health, compassionate communities. This, of course, is the last COIN meeting of the year. We don't meet in December, not in public anyway.
So would you like to say that you are AI skeptical? How many would be on that team?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, surprise, surprise.
All right, good. It's good to know, just to get a little feel. Well, most of you know me. I'm Kat. I'm a medical doctor and a AI-interested PhD student. And I work with risk prediction in my everyday life, mostly for cardiovascular disease, and we're trying to use machine learning as part of predicting and see if we can enhance the risk prediction tools that we already have available. Simply, I work with the University of Southern Denmark at the research unit for general practice, and then I am a visiting researcher at the self-care academic research unit at Imperial College London. Does anyone have an idea what this is about, this article?
1834.
Oh, yeah.
Was it about the telephone?
No, it's a good guess. It's actually the stethoscope.
It's actually what, sorry?
The stethoscope.
I thought you said Tesco then. Yeah.
It's not an actually new, profound thing that we are a bit skeptical to the new. I think it's rather healthy, actually. Anyways, program for today. Short introduction, really brief. What is AI? How does it work? Please keep in mind, I'm a clinician. I'm not a data scientist. I might just know a bit more than the average clinician, but I'm happy to take any big question with me further to the scientists that we have on my project. Now, how do we communicate with AI? How it can help us solve some of the challenges in general practice? Now, I chose general practice as a focus because it is simply a big part of primary care and the communities. Also a place that we might sometimes have trouble with what used to be some really trusted relationships. And then challenges using AI, and then we're going to hear from the AI through the, COIP through the AI lens, so from the robot itself, from one of the chatbots. And then lastly, the important part, the interesting part, we're going to hear from the biological networks, which is you guys. Well, AI is a sort of umbrella terminology for, just using computer science and data really for problem solving, where machine learning is a subset or branch of AI, which is how computers can adapt to patterns and learn from data that is already available in the data set, and then adjust from what it learns in that data later on, without actually being programmed, where deep learning is a subset of machine learning that sort of layers algorithms and computing units or neurons into artificial networks that kind of mimics the human brain. But just to be like really brief, it's a whole lot of math. That's basically what it is. Now, machine learning and deep learning can sound really similar, but they are different in the way that they work. So machine learning is a bit more simple, one plane. You add some statistical modeling, usually a bit more complex than what we use in medicine, to data set, and it then teaches and learns from the patterns in that data set through predictive association, where deep learning has a lot less assumptions and can handle a lot more complex data. So there has to be less data structure, and it is working essentially really deep and has a bit more of a black box to say, and transparency as we would in machine learning. Now, really, like simply, it's data in, form a network, have an output that the model will then compare to some sort of ground truth. Could do that through an error function, go back, adjust the predicted or the weights of a vector in this network, and then update the network, and then rinse, repeat. So the better and the more data, the better the model. But again, really simply, it's still math. Or ChatGPT is the most known generative AI model that is. And it's basically a big language model, and it works just like deep machine or deep learning with probabilities. So basically, you talk to the model, it then translates everything you say into computable reading units called tokens, and then it reads all its tokens at once, meaning that it simply take every single variable that is present in that underlying data set and give it all a weighted distribution, calculate the probability for what is the next token that's supposed to be in that line of tokens, and then picks that. Or sometimes sample randomly from distribution to maybe sound a bit more human. Find the correct response to you, translate it back into human language, and then you respond, and then the cycle keeps going on. Obviously, a computer doesn't know how you talk, so that has to be learned either by fine-tuning or model training, which is essentially humans who are giving the data set a really high quality answers, and then ranging, like giving a score almost to the answers coming out of the model, that the model can then keep sort of comparing its answers to in reinforcement training. So that's how they keep getting better and better. Still, just a lot of math. Now, we communicate with AI, depending on the model, different ways, but to a chatbot, we use prompting. Now, prompt engineering is essentially us writing a message, often text, but can be anything really, depending on the chatbot that you have or the model that you have. And essentially, you're given an instruction in order to get an answer back, and you're actually programming on top without changing the underlying model. So if you have a log-on profile, for instance, to Copilot, you will change your algorithm on top of it with how you prompt it in comparison to someone else, depending on what you feed it. So for prompting techniques, could be a question asked, or could be a focus or a role, and then you give it some sort of context to what it is to talk about. It really depends on what you're looking for. Now, a master prompt could have it all, really. And this is obviously just a way that you could prompt your chatbot. Give it a role you're an expert in, a context you work as, an action, you must do this. A prompt, and then the technique is please answer in this, or use this guideline when you answer. And then a format obviously could be language, and say who the audience is to. That way you end up, the more precise your prompt, the more precise your answer. So obviously, if you're looking for a 200 word abstract, obviously just saying, tell me what Coinbase is going to give you a full A4 page. So now there's many different AI tools available today. These are some different ones. Research Rabbit is great for searching up papers. Claude and Copilot, ChatGPT, all multi-purpose chatbot. Now, I have the most experience with Copilot, which is essentially the ChatGPT algorithm, but that has been altered to fit a more academic purpose. And I used a very, very generic and easy prompting technique with a question, because I wanted to know how much my profile at Copilot knew about the challenges we're facing in general practice. And, it came out really generic with a lot of the things, quite extensive list still. Aging population, increase in patient risk, increase in chronic illness, fragmented digital systems, complex health issues, financial pressure, increased maternity burden, workforce. You guys are covering it for me a little bit. Shortages. And increasing societal expectation, healthcare inequity, and medication interaction, fragmentation of care, really important problem that we're facing at the minute. And limited consultation time, underfunding, workforce policy failures, policy instability, information overload, and burnout. So some really, heavy but yet well-known problems that we're facing. Now, I know this slide is a bit small for you guys, sorry about it. But we took a poster to an AI convention at Novo Nordisk in Copenhagen. And we sort of presented why general practice was a great place to start with using AI to try and improve healthcare. Basically, especially in Denmark, we have the center personal registration number, meaning that we connect all our data to this one number. So we have a huge amount of data connected at various fields to people through that one personal number. So that means that we have a lot of data present that is continuous over many years. Most Danish people use their GPs 6 to 7 times a year, some more, some less. But we still have all this information that can be really hard to process for the doctor and everyone who works there, really. However, we think that AI would be great at solving these solutions. We also feel like there would be some dilemmas that would be hard to deal with when using AI in general practice. For instance, if you then have wrong treatment or bad treatment outcome, who do you blame? Do you blame the computer? Who is responsible for the treatment anymore? Should we be allowed to overrule an AI suggestion? I mean, this is based sometimes on billions of vectors, and we are just a little human who is right. But in case that we are wrong, who is then to blame? And, who owns that data? Once you take data out and you collect it in big data centers, that means that someone has rights to it, and it is no longer just the patient. So there's a lot of interesting dilemmas that we're having a hard time sort of solving, and there's not really, I feel, a right answer to them most of the time. This is a very, I want to say, typical patient, but it is a patient. I'm multimorbid patient, Magda, age 87. Now, she is not a real patient, but she's based on a real patient. She has multiple diseases, COPD, reduced kidney function, aortic stenosis, type 2 diabetes, and a really big medicine list here. And de-prescribing based on her medical case, of course, not just listening to her, but knowing what kind of interactions she could have between her medicine and what drug is causing what side effects, what is risk reducing still for a woman in her age, and what is just extra is really hard to know, even for a trained pharmacologist. So this is one of the areas where a sort of summarizing AI technology could help us see what's in her, very extensive medical file at 87. Maybe there'll be some interactions we weren't aware of, or maybe the model could find some side effects that's caused by the same medication. So this is just one of the places where we feel like AI could be helpful. Now, obviously, we're facing a huge amount of challenges because there's no such thing as a free lunch. So when working with AI, we have a lot of challenges, ethical considerations. The models are never more ethically correct than you are. So the people who make it will be having a huge job in front of them to make it ethical to use, meaning that you have to look out for bias, people have to be represented in the data set. And next thing, when we finally let that go, let's say it's the best possible model, people then have to interpret it correctly for it to be safe to use, which is another hurdle. The data quality has to be good. I mean, when you have full data sets on people in primary care settings or even just communal settings, you're going to have a lot of missing data, which can really skew your numbers and your predictability in the data set. Bias. The world is biased, and so will the data set be. Large models are not great for novel situations. So anything that's out of distribution would cause a big problem. The bigger the model, there's actually a big risk that it can also do catastrophic forgetting, meaning that it will actually start forgetting what it was initially taught, which is obviously a big problem if you are teaching something on a huge data set and it just starts to throw out knowledge and you have no idea of knowing whether or not it's thrown out this knowledge before. It requires a huge amount of data to train. And then there's the brilliant part that especially generative AI can actually hallucinate, meaning that when it feels like it can't predict something for certain, it can make it up. And I'm not sure any of you have had any experience with hallucinations before in generative AI. No. Well, my professor actually had a great one. He decided to ask it about this new paper that he published in the Lancet recently, and it found his paper and put it up there and said, "This is the paper that you published in Lancet recently." It was a great paper. The problem was that my professor didn't write any paper for the Lancet, so it simply took the knowledge that it had and actually wrote an entire paper. I've also found great papers from journals that doesn't exist. So it simply copied a paper from another journal, and then so there's a huge credibility problem sometimes if you have facts and science that you can't prove, because it could be replicas or just little snippets cut in from here and there. Big problem as well is environmental issues. This is Maria Hvid. She's actually an expert at the Danish Society for Engineers, and she made this article in the Danish news on how much it actually costs for us to run these algorithms. I mean, just one prompt to ChatGPT is the same as 40 charges of a mobile phone. It costs millions of liters of water to cool down these huge data centers. So finding a sustainable energy source is really important if this is supposed to be part of our everyday life, if everyone starts prompting. This is some interesting literature, because according to the European Medical Agency, it's really important that we keep up monitoring AI in healthcare, mostly on predicting performance. They want us to keep evaluating these models based on performance metrics. So simply statistical models and seeing how well is it performing, how precise is the prediction. That could be a few area under the curve, or sensitivity, specificity. But actually, you can build amazing models that predict really well, but it can still be harmful. So Van Amsterdam is Wouter van Amsterdam is a doctor and a data scientist at the Medical Center of Utrecht, and he published recently some really interesting papers on how models, especially AI models, can keep bettering themselves on harmful prophecies. So he made a really great this really great example. Theoretically, it hasn't happened, but could very well happen, of a hospital who wants to save patients with very short time left due to aggressive tumors of going into radiotherapy. So they built a model that said, okay, split the patients up into two, who has the longest survival time, the slow-growing tumors or the fast-growing tumors. Now, obviously, going into radiotherapy, you'll end up spending hours and hours getting this therapy, and with big side effects. So they built a model to predict who will have the shortest time to live and who should get this treatment. And that is terribly dangerous, because now the statisticians don't know that, but if you have a fast-growing tumor, that means that there's a high cell turnover and there will be a lot of DNA exposed, and therefore you will actually benefit from radiotherapy. But if you have a slow-growing tumor, you won't benefit so much, but you'll still live longer. This meant that then this model would essentially keep killing off people with fast-growing tumors, and therefore the prophecy that the model says who's going to die first is going to self-fulfill. So the model is going to keep getting better and better scores and look amazing on paper, but it'll be really harmful for patients. So he is voting for, instead of looking at predicting measures, you should be looking at patient outcome instead. The other paper is actually quite recently sent to me by Tony Burke. Thank you, Tony. What we lose when we surrender care to algorithms. Now, that's a pretty new paper in The Guardian by Eric Reinhardt, who had a really unpleasant experience. Now, Eric is an anthropologist and a doctor, and went to a physician with his friend, who then had his GP use an AI script and completely missed her actual complaints. So all the unspoken, the fear of her illnesses and everything she actually wanted to talk about was not part of the note-taking that this AI script used during the consultation. And Eric focused a great deal on the fallibility of the program, which was an AI script, which is a note-taker. It functions on the spoken word. But I think instead of looking at the program, he actually uncovered quite a shortage of the doctor instead that didn't listen to his patient. Now, it's hard to say if the doctor was busy looking at the program and therefore didn't pay attention to his patient, or whether, he would have heard it anyways, or if the doctor actually even knew the patient enough to know what was unspoken in that saying. But really an interesting paper sort of highlighting some of the problems with using AI in a clinical setting. Now, this is another little note from Van Amsterdam. He made a cute point that actually prediction models now that are not AI relevant, like QRisk3 or your heart forecast, which is a prediction model for 5 to 10 year risk of cardiovascular disease in New Zealand, you can actually have really bad predictors just in a regular regression model. So if you are 75 years old and you have a normal blood pressure and a normal lipid levels, you will actually be better off not taking blood pressure lowering medication according to the model if you sit there with your patient, put in the entire medical screening, and then click on and click off. I think it's 4% that having blood pressure medication will actually increase your risk of heart disease. And that's obviously not because you increase your risk. That is just how the model is, because in the data set, people who have a high blood pressure medication will usually have had many years of risk, elevating predictors like hypertension, for instance. So it's just fun how it's, quite tragic actually, how we really need to be careful to how we interpret these models. And I contacted the leading epidemiologist in Auckland to ask how they actually came around this and how they use this with their patients without risking, deprescribing when they shouldn't. And they really educate their GPs on how to interpret these models. Now, this you all know is from the Coin paper by Paul. And I took this piece before our discussions because it's from the Journal of Holistic Healthcare and Primary Care. And it's really all about, I think it's Peter Checkland's call to always use both soft and hard systems in community-oriented integration, meaning that we need both science and creative thinking when we are talking about, furthering in life and making trusted relationships and actually bettering outcomes for people in our communities. And I thought it was such a fun way to ask the robot what it thought it could do for furthering community-oriented integration. And I asked for a personal opinion, which it told me it couldn't give me because it can give a reasoned perspective, but it doesn't have personal opinions. But it came out with some pretty good things, however, still very hard system thinking, that it can help our need assessments and it can help tailor interventions for individuals and communities. It can, increase accessibility and efficiency. It could further collaboration, it even says so, by connecting multidisciplinary teams, give better feedback and monitoring, and even improve equity through identifying underserved groups. However, it also states a bunch of risks, sorts of misinterpretation, complete reduce of human touch and empathy, and privacy concerns, and a lot of the other concerns we actually already talked about earlier. So it then tries to feed me with a let's be creative and do it in a map, but I still find it very hard system thinking. It's still just community, personalized services, inclusive communication, and resource optimization. So still very much in the computer performance world. Now, I realized afterwards, if you were a pessimist or optimist regarding AI, which I then actually realized was not very soft thinking of me, to put you in a binary category. I'm not aware if you're still pessimistic about this, now that you know a bit more. Have I completely ruined your faith? Lucy is nodding.
A little bit for me. I think I was more optimist.
No, you're not happy listening to the math, yeah, John? Still pessimist?
No, actually,
I've learned more about AI in a healthcare context in the last half an hour than in the last couple of years. No, I think I'm not an early adopter by preference, which is why I haven't really explored it very much. But I think you've essentially persuaded me that I should, whatever the outcomes are.
Sunjay?
Well, I'm slightly more optimistic because it seems that the robot could itself recognize that it might reduce touch and empathy within a service interaction. So that is cause, I think, for slight hope if the robot recognizes its own limitations. What worries me and makes me veer sometimes towards pessimism is the issue you raised earlier about who has the final say, whether we would ever reach the point where the clinician would not have the final word and say, well, look, this is my patient. Ultimately, I will decide what treatment to offer or not to offer, whether we've reached the point where, basically if the AI system says you treat, you have to treat, even if the clinician thinks it's actually the wrong thing to do. I don't know whether you have a view on that.
I believe this is a tool, and I believe that it is nothing more than math. And it was quite interesting to hear you say that you hear the robot recognizing that what its shortcomings is. That's because that's part of that training set. It's not the robot who is conscious in any way, shape, or form. It predicts what you're looking for in the next answer, and by that, I think it's a calculator. And I think that we should, just like when we see ECG assessments from a machine learning algorithm, I think we should ultimately have the last say. It is entirely possible that the robot is wrong, but knowing when it gets this extensive, can be really hard. So it's a dilemma. But I would treat this as a suggestion, food for thought, especially not at this point. I can't speak for the next 100 years or so, but especially not now.
Well, first, thanks very much, Kat. That was really great, and I learned a lot. I didn't know very much about AI before, other than the stuff you hear in general, so that was great. I was really interested to note how fallible it is, and the fact that you've identified that and it has been generally identified, I assume. But my concern in the use of it clinically, whether it's for promoting COIP or just in general, is the advent of HMOs. Obviously in America they're used extensively, and I know from personal experience, having lived out there and worked in the field, the risk is that the HMO uses the AI and overrides the doctor. And I think that's already happening, to be honest with you. So that's quite a cause for concern. I also didn't realize that AI could forget its own training, which is really scary. Very alarming. Yeah.
It's especially, it starts usually, I just saw it described by a data scientist, it starts in the beginning. So it's usually the first data, but they never really know what data it will just catastrophically forget when it's that large.
So first, do no harm. Could be the first thing it forgets.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. That was really interesting. I can afford to be a skeptic because I'm not in clinical practice any longer, and I can play the old fart role easily enough. But on the other hand, I'm a member of my practice's patient participation group, and I've been raising the issue of digital exclusion around, but not including but not exclusive to older people, and the difficulty that a lot of people have in accessing digital healthcare. Now, they overlap. I'm not saying it's all about AI, but it's about algorithmic approach to healthcare. And I set that against the relational aspect of healthcare, particularly in primary care. And I'm interested, out of clinical practice for some years now, what I forget and what I don't. Don't ask me about drugs or dosages or normal values unless I know, because I'm the patient and I've kind of mugged up on them and stuff like that. But I was at this workshop, and I'm sorry that Duke can't join us, but I was at this workshop and we were talking different people from different areas, mainly in social care, but disability charity, carers charity, people talking about relational conversations. And I talked probably too much, but hopefully some of the time at least eloquently, about boundaries and all sorts of stuff. And it's all there still. And I worry that AI will be used to detach, and I use that word advisedly, clinicians from patients. And it doesn't have to be AI related, it's just an algorithmic approach. And how we're going to actually deal with that and how we're going to manage it. And I have to say that that is the skeptical angle. The other side of it is you don't know until you've tried it and you've experimented with it and you've asked all the right questions. But my practice use some magic AI related stuff to record the consultation and make notes. But I said, hang on, I used that 2 minutes after the patient left the room to stop and think and reflect about the consultation, and in writing, thinking about what I needed to look out for next, or what one of my colleagues would need to in writing the notes. And it was really important to make a break between patients and to stop and just think for a moment about what had gone on. And he said, yes, actually, magic notes, I think it was called, doesn't actually save any time at all. It takes longer because people are doing just that. So, and
my instincts as an old doctor is that ultimately it's the doctor that makes the decision. But it'd be interesting to know, especially with Chris here, have there been any legal cases where somebody has complained about the doctor not following the AI? Because that's what I see as a potential reverse problem.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if anybody's got any knowledge of that. I certainly haven't.
One of the things the lawyers are doing, and law firms are developing their own versions of sort of Copilot or ChatGPT. And David, I think that's maybe where your point comes in, that if firms are developing quite sophisticated applications that are geared towards, for example, the law, could be to medicine, you might get to the point where actually, if you don't listen to the results of your input, and when you're drafting or you're dealing with a case, and you go with your own sort of judgment, to what extent that could be negligent potentially, because a lot of work and application. So definitely, people talked, and Kat talked about potentially having to take heed, and the overriding issue. Yeah, I can definitely see, David, that you might be persuaded to leave your expertise behind because actually an expert model is telling you something different. And negligence is all about doing. You have to take reasonable care not to sort of harm your neighbour in that sense. And if all the reasonable information being given to you and it's become sort of practice to use it, then if you don't follow AI, maybe in a law firm like that, you could potentially struggle.
Have there been any cases that
I'm not sure on that, but on certainly cases, definitely legal cases on hallucination. There's a very sort of famous case just gone through really, where I think they were barristers actually, and picking up John's point, maybe the barrister he was talking about was either worrying or interested in the AI, that the lawyers in a particular case in the High Court or Court of Appeal, it could have been even, it got to the point where it reached the Court of Appeal, this particular case, and the Court of Appeal realised, which the lower courts didn't, that the two key cases that were cited in the case that the decision was made on were found to have been hallucinations by AI and didn't actually exist. As a result of that, the party lost its case because the lawyers had included references that were not correct. They were just created by the AI. And as a result, those two barristers, are going through disciplinary proceedings, through the bar and so on. So, it's personal ramifications. And I think the court basically said the lawyers were negligent not to pick that up really effectively.
Right. This business of who holds the responsibility for a clinical decision is really interesting, and there's quite a large scholarship on that's crossed my desk in the last couple of months. Actually, but if you think about it conceptually, there's no real difference between consulting an AI and being beholden to it, and consulting a local guideline and being beholden to that. You've got to explain why you depart from a guideline, and it's kind of the same thing, really. I accept the fact it's got to play out yet. Something, Kat, that you made reference to was the use of consultation support in the sense of recording the consultation, which Tony has some qualms about. And you probably know Benedict Hayhoe, who's also in your department at Imperial. He's in the primary care department, who's something of an expert on this. He's a GP in Holborn. And he's on the ethics committee of the RCGP with me. And he's actually written various papers on this. We can swap names and addresses and stuff. He's a very good resource, Benedict, and he's worked in digital health for many years. No, the story I was going to tell is slightly more interesting. It's actually from a medical negligence barrister who's a friend of mine. I used to work with him at George's before he went over to the dark side, I say, without Chris listening. And he was presenting on his experience in supporting doctors, but it could be any healthcare professional, who've fallen foul of the GMC for professional misadventures of one sort. So instead of just doing the case and shoving off, he actually takes them on as patients, if you like, to support them back into practice when they've got into trouble with the GMC. And one of the things that we all know you should do when you are struggling a bit is, or even if you've got into trouble and you've made a mistake, is to talk to a colleague. It could be a senior colleague, it could be a peer, it could be anybody. But Daniel actually said one of the things he has researched is whether to ask ChatGPT. So if you've got a professional issue, instead of talking to a professional colleague, you might dial up ChatGPT in the way that Kat had described it and said, what do you think? Now, I reckon most of us would recoil in horror, and I certainly did when he said that. But then he presented some evidence which suggested that one of the instruments used to test the knowledge of professional behavior of doctors that get into trouble is an SJT. I don't know which one it is. And actually, ChatGPT gets better marks in this assessment than the professional advisors in medical defense bodies. Now, that's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the machine learning or whatever it is that's going on in all the mathematics that Kat described is actually getting better results than you, me, other senior members of the profession, or people who are paid to do it by the MDU. And I think that is absolutely stunning. I don't know why it's happening, and I can't
have a go, John. You don't know why it's happening, but have a guess or an idea or something.
Well, it would be easy to say it's a function of the assessment instrument, which would be the easy criticism. But I don't think that's good enough. And I don't know what the answer is. I haven't a clue.
Well, John, part of the answer is that machine learning is grabbing together all the history, really, that's ever been sort of said on that point that you put into ChatGPT. It's not only picking up textbooks, it's picking up practical experience, it's picking up stuff that's out there. It's, in a sense, sort of picking up all the previous events that have happened that are similar and using and thinking about and working through all that data at incredible speed, tons and tons of data, and logically then applying it back to you as a result of the question you've asked,
including the GMC.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It will be picking up law firm advice, be picking up GMC stuff.
Searches online, depending on what program. Sorry, Chris. It searches online, the entire World Wide Web through some search engine, and then different chatbots uses different search engines.
Yeah.
Can we run this a bit more? Essentially, I like the phrase "the more you know you don't know," and if a ChatGPT knows more than anybody else, it starts discovering how little it knows, perhaps. Why do we think that a ChatGPT is a better counsellor for someone who's in trouble than a professional paid to do the job? Anybody? If indeed this is a generalizable thing, or just...
You could add to a really good person's sort of armory. You know, if John had put a question to ChatGPT he was advising on, say, back at the ethics committee, he wouldn't necessarily roll that answer out that he'd got the previous evening at ChatGPT, and almost certainly there'll be nuances that John would still be able to add, even though he's got everything. There'll be slight differences with what he knows about that case or about the circumstances that will tailor what's just been sort of set up, because no single case is the same. And when I've sort of used it a little bit, for some legal questions, it might be just general stuff, background, and you can really roll with chat. You can have a proper conversation. It's a chat, and you can get something back, and then you can ask it again, and you can refine it, and it will still respond. And even when you've refined it to the nth degree, it will still say to you, "Oh, would you like me to do anything more for you there?" It's kind of that sort of thing. But I suspect most of the time with someone like John or anybody, it still might be that nuance I don't think it's necessarily going to pick up everything. The expertise doesn't go, but you've got a lot of stuff to feel really confident that you've done some research. But anyway,
I made a model, I don't remember the name, that did the medical test in America on their questionnaires, trained on the data that they teach, the books, etc. And I think it does better on the testing than 97% of the pupils taking the test. So it's not perfect, but it scours the internet with the data available. It's not great at every single thing. So like this COIP now, where I asked Copilot, I think I mentioned it as well, it didn't know what COIP was. I fed it articles from COIP to make sure that it knows what it was. It had no idea. It kept ringing up different kinds of I'm not sure, I didn't fact check every single one of them. Some of the acronyms could be real things, but it sounded very sort of put together from various texts. So it really depends on what you're asking it. If anyone has a time this evening, it could be really fun for you to ask it how many R's are in strawberry, because it will say the wrong thing. It's really bad at simple math.
Sanjay.
Well, I thought what Chris was saying was very, very interesting. And certainly, if I had an issue, no matter what it was, to be able to get quickly a summary of everything else that's been known to happen on that particular topic could be very, very useful. What worries me is what Kat said earlier, that it tells you what you want to know, what you already know, almost like telling you what you want to hear. So what is the sort of added value of it then, if that's all it's doing, playing back to you what you yourself want to hear? Have I misunderstood you, Kat, or is that what you actually said?
In a way, yes, you're right. It predicts what would be the thing that fits in your token row. So if you're asking about let's say a medical fact, it will go into its data set and find that medical fact and predict how many times it's read that, and then see what fits in that specific context. It replies to you in a nice and human way because of the reinforcement learning that human laborers essentially has started way back in the day, reading out really nice ways, like really good replies, and then ranking them. So not in a sense that it's not intelligent. It doesn't think what you want to think. It takes the token with the highest probability. So if you're feeding it constantly that the sky is green, then you're going to ask it, what color is the sky? It's going to say green, because that's what you fed it. So that's the highest probability of the color. That's why if you ask it what color is the forest, it'll say green, because that's what mostly available in the data set.
Linda?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, you've just kind of sort of answered one of my points, really. It's about consistency, is it not, with AI? So even if it gets it wrong, it's consistently going to say the wrong thing because of the data you've put in. So it's data in, rubbish in, rubbish out.
Shit in,
Just
shit
like
out,
any
excuse
other.
my French. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about probability. What is the highest predictability of the tokens in the entire data set? That is the one it will mention.
Yeah.
And if that one is wrong, it will still mention it.
Yeah. So in a sense, and Chris, thanks for your explanation as well, because in a sense, it's about that consistency that might be quite useful as a tool. I'm thinking of something years and years ago, teaching in a very basic way, research ethics. I found an article which described an experiment done in an ethics conference some time ago. It's quite ancient now. And the ethics, put people into ethics committees. These are experienced people working in ethics committees, research ethics committees. They had a number of them, and they gave them a certain proposal. And the inconsistency of the responses was remarkable. From some things that had already been cleared by previous committees were completely thrown out, which of course is not really very good because you always have to give feedback, but there was a lot of inconsistency is what I'm really saying. And I just wonder if that's one of the benefits of AI, that you shouldn't take everything it says as being absolutely true, but you could say it's consistent.
It's consistent, but I would say, as it all develops, if you ask the question today, it might be a different answer next week.
Yeah, because the data changes.
Because the data changes, and a guidance document may change, or a policy document. My experience so far is that it does try to, quite often say with a legal question, it will not just be throwing stuff out there that it's got, but it will try and base it on, for example, legislation and actual regulations, and it will say what, a 1978 Act said, which it thinks that is applicable. Mm-hmm. So it's not, you can get hard, solid stuff, which you can then check if you need to. But it will, because it is looking at everything that might be applicable and trying to work out what's most up to date and what's still in force. I might ask it, is the Equal Pay Act 1975 still in force? And you'll get chapter and verse back as to whether it is. And so you can check that if you've got something really important to do, or you can sort of add that into your sort of calculations. But you do get facts back about where it's not just sort of stuff. It will often be linked to trying to fix of why it is telling you something, and telling you why it's telling you that.
Can I bring back Tony's earlier point about magic notes, that it actually lengthened the time because it gave a pause for reflection? I'm feeling more optimistic about this than I ever have before, because I think of that potential for it to cause reflection. I think human beings throughout history have looked to a higher authority that tells them what to do. It's called God or a priest or a doctor or a protocol or whatever. And what I like about this is the ChatGPT thing says, well, this is what has been done before, but don't ask me to form a view about what you should be doing now. Your job. Well, rather approve of that.
But we will be asking ChatGPT to form an opinion, and we'll rely on that for all the reasons you've just given.
Then our job is to prevent that happening.
And that's an opportunity and a danger, isn't it?
And we have to not only prevent that happen politically and actively, in sense, but philosophically. Actually, nobody knows everything, not even God, whoever she is. But there must be a point at which the whatever authority you're using is required to say where its authority comes from, what this authority comes from. A load of words put in the public domain in different kind of places that it's now presenting to you to think about. could be quite useful.
I have a lot of coworkers who love the AI scripts, which is the magic notes that you're talking about. So a script algorithm that will put down anything that's spoken out in the room, kind of like if you had a dictaphone or a secretary sitting. It is not at all perfect. I tried saying something into it, like medical terminologies or even medication, and it'll write gibberish. So you really have to correct it anyways afterwards. But if you really have like one of those lengthy conversations with people, maybe a crisis conversation, I feel like it's really good to give a sort of thematic overview afterwards, but where you completely ignore it. It's not even in the room, and then you get the whole script, every detail, which was what's said, and then you have to sort of remember if this is rubbish or not. So for that, I think it's really useful, and I have a lot of coworkers who love it, but it still requires work, just like a secretary sitting there.
Supposing the magic notes did exactly that, and both you and the patient in front of you went away with this and said, let's both of us reflect on this. I'll see you in 2 weeks and see where we're up to. You're providing an opportunity for everyone to reflect on it. Might be quite helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you can go away, but the magic notes won't have any part of that. It can only do what it's made to do.
Yes, but if neither the doctor or the patient or any human encounter is actually aware of their own limitations and subconscious desires and needs inside what they're saying, and they're not really listening to the words at all or valuing the words because they're trying to get over whatever it is in some kind of more hidden way, this could be a way of surfacing and facilitating reflection on whether they actually really did mean that. I'm going to go and kill myself. Let's talk about that. You said that last time. Is that actually what you mean?
You made a very good point there. And I think the reflection, it could be used in general practice if the notes are not the notes, but the kind of summation by magic notes is used with the patient. Because one of the things within research, often if you're working qualitatively, is to reflect back to the people you've been interviewing to see if you've actually interpreted what they're saying, if this rings true. So I suppose there is a way that it might be quite interesting to use. But surely one of the issues with AI is how you ask the question. And that could be very, very influential. And perhaps one of the biggest training points in using AI is how you ask the question.
And how you ask the question, but it is really important on how you use it, because a lot of people will misuse it and not use it for what it's intended for. And now there are no chatbots that I've seen that's part of general practice just yet, that I know of. Maybe someone knows a different one. But yeah, like the paper that Tony had sent me from Eric Reinhardt that said that he was very disappointed with the computer not being able to see the unspoken is a very common misinterpretation of what this model actually can do. So if you think that it's supposed to be used like that doctor used it and forgot about what the patient was mentioning or what the AI put forward, then you're misusing it. It is no different than typing on the computer.
What other information you get with the patient in the room and the doctor and the patient or whoever it is interacting on multiple levels at the same time, including, of course, all the unspoken communication.
You will all know, and this is kind of relevant to us in COIN, I would think, that a third of the 10-year plan for England is to do with digitalising health more than it is. And we obviously would have our views on that more generally. But with reference to this, if people like Pakita or Rupal Shah were on this call tonight, they would immediately point the conversation towards the relational aspect. And the idea, for example, that the listening bot stroke AI can't pick up nonverbal communication, that if you ask patients whether they want to talk to a computer via an AI or talk to a human being, it's blindingly obvious what is said. So I think this issue of the trust relationship between ourselves as healthcare professionals and our patients has been challenged in all sorts of ways in the last few years, last 20 years. and it's got room to be challenged a hell of a lot more if this digitalizing trend, which our current government's very keen on, as the last one was, actually continues at pace. I don't know how that's going to end up. I mean, I'd be very interested to know what you think about that, Kat.
On how it will affect trusted relationships. Sorry,
well, all aspects of the doctor-patient relationship, really.
I in the matter of the relationship in the room, I think I have a foot in either camp. A bit funny when I asked you all if you were either skeptics or positive about it. I think it can, if used correctly, really help us free some time from generic tasks that would allow me to be the doctor I actually want to be in front of my patient. But I think if it's used as a substitute, which I fear some might, it could be detrimental for our relationships to one another. But I think it has really great potential with the right mind and the right attitude and the right focus, that it can be probably life-changing for how we work in general practice especially, and how we can get in touch not just with young tech savvy, but also with people who might have disability coming to us. I mean, Tony spoke about the elderly earlier, who might have a hard time seeing, a hard time hearing, and here chatbots that could be spelling out stuff for me, or where they could be writing to me, just like we have with the e-consultation, can sometimes be very helpful.
So I'm actually on my way to talk to a number of seniors, older people, about whether they want a caregiver companion robot. As Paul and some of you know, I have an NIH grant with Hopkins to once again look at the caregiving robots in the context now, of course, of an AI inspired robot. And actually some of our concerns about the topic you're talking about right now, which is...
I was thinking back to when Google first arrived and patients started Googling their symptoms and coming in, of course, with dire diagnoses. And the outrage I felt that I was no longer the end pathway and the expert for all their concerns and worries and symptoms. And how I fairly quickly found one way of dealing with it, which is, you ended up on scaremushitless.com, did you? And got a laugh until I failed to diagnose sense of humour failure and the patient never saw me again. But I'm just thinking about having to get used to people turning up with Google-based diagnoses already, and how that changed things. And then it became much more of a negotiation. And I take Kat's point of view that, there is, despite my skepticism, which I can afford because I'm not in the field anymore, how actually an AI companion, whatever, can open a path to a negotiation, really, about what's important. And so I can see how it can be used. I'm just terribly afraid, like so much of the internet that we've had over the last 30 years, can be misused as well, and that will be shoveled into a de-skilled little corner and told to believe the bot.
And wouldn't it be useful if we were able to say, look, this is what's been known from the past, but human relationships are born through banter, interaction, co-creative stuff. We'll do that first, and we'll follow them through with things like continuity of care and telephone digital follow-up and checking what Magic Note says and so on. So you use it as a tool for relationship building, not instead of.
I think we've all expressed some reservations about it, myself included. But I think it's important not to lose sight of one of the points that Kat made in her presentation, and that is the sheer tsunami of demand that's threatening to engulf not only general practice, but the entire healthcare system. And that's going to get worse, if not better in the future, with the aging of the population and with so many other factors. If AI, in spite of all the potential drawbacks, can help in dealing with that, well, so be it. I mean, I think that has to be for the good, surely.
Actually, a really good point, Sujay. I spoke with a data scientist on it, and ChatGPT, well, many other big scale models read all its vectors at once, right? And just like that, it can do all these calculations for, I think the last count was over 7 quintillion variables. And then a lot of other numbers after that I can't say. And just like that, you can read a whole patient file in seconds. I mean, we could all do these calculations by hand or computer, but it would take us lifetimes. So there is a substantial amount to gain with the increasing load that we have. And I wanted to comment on Peter Whitehouse, really, because he was talking about a caregiving robot. And I just spoke to my professor the other day in Denmark, and he actually spoke to a engineer who just engineered a chatbot for a lady who lost her husband rather recently through videos and old voice notes and voice calls, and actually made a chatbot of which she could talk to someone who sounded like her dead husband. And I was so conflicted because this woman had gone out of our own pockets. It's a standalone case. He was not making a profit of any kind, and she was finding great consolation in asking this bot, how was your day, and this kind of stuff. But I found there was some really big ethical problems in that sort of melting pot if we start selling off people who used to die off as comfort. But I can also see that, should there be patients who would gain from talking to a chatbot? I was thinking maybe long dementia patients who sometimes hear certain music and that would calm them down, or play an old phone recording or something of the loved ones. I mean, there is potential for goodness, but it seems like an ethical beehive.
At the long-term care facility, so maybe I could just jump back in. I hope I don't lose you again. I think the issue of relationship is key, and what I was thinking about and what we're trying to do with this robot is not just have a one-off chat GPT session, which as we know, depending on how you set it up, can just be a conversation where the chat GPT forgets you, so that the next session is completely independent. To me, the importance of whether it's a doctor-patient relationship or a colleague relationship is the ongoing nature of the relationship, so that theoretically the relationship should build over time, which would help the therapeutic intent. And the robot would have to get you to know you. For example, many of us are very irritated by robots that are overly praising of us. So somehow it's symbiotic wisdom, because it seems to me that we have to accept the good and the bad. We have to work with this. So symbiotic is the word that says together with based intelligences, we actually need to move beyond intelligence, incorporate relationship and values, and make that wisdom. So
is it possible that there's a split amongst the GPs I know from being the transactional one and the relational one? And this might strengthen the relational bit, because that's the difference that's going to happen when they get evidence from the internet, whether it's us or them or from AI. It seems to me the key thing is the trust between the patient and you.
Yep.
And many of our profession, I'm afraid, are erring towards the more transactional approach. And it's going to be quite a test, because I always sometimes think that a consultant physician is going to be much more redundant, because the local guy may not know as much as what stuff you can get on the internet, which is true even without AI, but we'll have better access. So I think it could strengthen the importance of relation, and that's something I think that the college would accept, but that maybe is part of the education of the future GP, that we've gone maybe straying away from that relational model.
That's very interesting, yes.
Linda, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to ask about how you're going to interpret this in your paper. because it's obviously the basis of the paper. I'd be interested to see how that evolves. So I was just wondering if you'd got any thoughts at this stage, or if you were still going to look at the data first.
We have 30 seconds left, so you better speak fast.
Well, yeah, I have lots of different thematics here, and I think there is some sort of red thread that's called relationships that I think I'm going to take further. But further than that, I think I want to ponder on it and perhaps discuss even more on it. But I wanted to leave you with one saying before we shut it all down. And I'm going to butcher his name, but he's one of the chief scientists at OpenAI. He's called Elias Sutskever, I think. And he made a great tweet that said, it was an answer to a different tweet, but it said, AI, artificial intelligence, is intelligent in the same way that a field of wheat is slightly pasta. Basically, it's not intelligent. It just sounds like it.
It's very like human beings. This has thrown up so much for me, and I'm much, much, much more optimistic than I was an hour and a half ago.
I think we have to talk about the sauce on the pasta.
Yes, and you know, Jamie Oliver's quite good, but you do also need to be able to stick your finger in and taste it. I can imagine the situation where comes a little bit what I've been experiencing in the last couple of weeks, actually. The robot will come in and the patient will say, "Not you again, I want the other robot."
Yeah.
And the robot will say, "Not you again, I want the other patient."
No, completely. Yeah.
Kat, final word.
Thank you guys for coming to my TED Talk. It was lovely to see that everyone else is also really interested in this field. I'm sorry.